Thank you for staying with us. In case you're just joining us, this is the News International Edition, and we are coming to you live from our Vision Group headquarters here in Kampala, Uganda. Now, as the world celebrated the International Women's Day yesterday, a series of events were held in honor of the day. And from Afghanistan, a group of women held a demonstration in a Kabul street calling on the international community to protect Afghans. If staying at home will take us to heaven, then I don't want to go to heaven, says Mahira Karimi, as a group of women gathered in the courtyard of a house in Mazar-e-Sharif in northern Afghanistan, calling for their rights to work and education. Afghanistan under the Taliban government is the most repressive country in the world for women's rights, with authorities effectively trapping women and girls in their homes, the United Nations said on Wednesday.
About 20 women held a rare demonstration in a Kabul street on Wednesday, calling on the international community to protect Afghans, AFP journalists witnessed. Our demand from the Islamic Emirate is that it reopens the doors of schools, universities and offices for women so that they can get an education, and from that education they can serve their country and help in its progress. The Taliban government adheres to an austere interpretation of Islam and has imposed a slew of restrictions on girls and women since seizing power in August 2021. It's been distressing to witness their methodical, deliberate and systematic efforts to push Afghan women and girls out of the public sphere, Rosa Utunbayeva, head of the UN mission in Afghanistan, said in a statement marking International Women's Day. The UN mission said the crackdown was a colossal act of national self-harm at a time Afghanistan faces some of the world's largest humanitarian and economic crises. We all gathered here for our demands, and we all have the same demand. The school doors must be reopened, and we should use our inalienable right to have a self-sufficient and good country. As God has said himself, education is obligatory for men and women, and this is an inalienable right for all of us. And I request from the caretaker government that we all be able to use our inalienable rights. Taliban authorities have removed women from all but essential government jobs or are paying them a fraction of their former salary to stay at home. Women are also barred from going to parks, fun fairs, gyms and public baths, and ordered to cover up in public, ideally with a burqa. But the biggest crackdown has been on teenage girls and university students, with the authorities banning them from secondary schools and higher educational institutions. If staying at home will take us to heaven, then I don't want to go to heaven when they are creating so many restrictions on what to wear and how to wear it. If when a man looks at you, he should not be incited, then why don't men cover their eyes? Why don't they wear a mask on their eyes or mouth so they don't look at women? Why should we always be under pressure of the men? Some women have staged sporadic protests against the bans, risking arrest, violence and social stigma for taking part, but authorities usually disperse them swiftly. No country has officially recognized the Taliban government as Afghanistan's legitimate rulers, with the right to education for women a sticking point in negotiations over aid and recognition. More than half of the country's 38 million people are facing hunger, and nearly 4 million children suffer from malnutrition, aid agencies say. The crisis was compounded late last year when the Taliban leadership banned Afghan women from working with NGOs, forcing several aid agencies to suspend their vital work. Foreign aid has also declined dramatically since Afghanistan's assets were frozen by the United States after the Taliban returned to power, further aggravating the crisis. Alison Davidian, the United Nations Special Representative for Women in Afghanistan, said the implications of the government's policies impacts all Afghans and will resonate throughout generations.
And from Palestine, Palestinian women displayed edible cakes in the shape of monuments during an event at the St. Hilarion Monastery, also known as Tel Amer, in the central Gaza Strip, to celebrate the International Women's Day. Shakra, a member of the Palestinian Association for Culinary Arts, explains the event.
The idea behind this event is to show the archaeological sites in Palestine, especially in Gaza. We made 6 edible sculptures, 5 archaeological sites in Gaza, plus the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. These sculptures were made of raw materials with a certain quality that can make the cakes last for a long time. We used edible chocolate, cream and raw materials that can withstand high temperature. This event is organized to display edible cakes in the shape of monuments and were made by Palestinians from the Gaza Strip on the occasion of International Women's Day. 7 six-figures sculptures that represent the Palestinian heritage and heritage sites in Palestine are displayed.
And from North Korea, people danced and watched a musical performance to mark the International Women's Day in the capital of Pyongyang. Wednesday was the International Women's Day, an occasion that is not on an official holiday in North Korea, but is marked through public celebrations that trumpet the role of women in the country.
Article 77 of North Korea's constitution states that women are accorded equal social status and rights with men. The reality, however, is starkly different. While the number of women in prominent positions in the North Korean state has grown, millions of ordinary women in the country continue to live under an unequal demanding system while balancing responsibilities in their workplaces and families, experts say. I am very glad I have been waiting for today. Thanks to the love of our party, I am very healthy to this day. There is no one like our leaders in the world. I think I can live until 100 years old. Women's Day highlights North Korea's stark patriarchal reality. Despite gains by a few elites, most women in the country suffer inequality. I am really glad, under the love of the party, our women could become the owners of society. A 2022 Human Rights Watch report reached similar conclusions, saying that the increased involvement of women in leadership does not appear to have resulted in policy changes. The report states that North Korean women and girls are subject to intense and pervasive human rights abuses, including sexual and gender-based violence, widespread discrimination, and enforcement of rigid gender stereotypes.
Now, women were beginning to hit the streets en masse across the globe on Wednesday to defend rights that are coming under increasing attack. To mark the International Women's Day, capitals across the world hosted marches, rallies, and demonstrations, including Madrid, where broad tree-lined boulevards are packed regularly with a sea of purple, a color often associated with women's rights.
Marches took place on Wednesday in Thailand and Indonesia, where a few dozen women gathered in front of the country's parliament to urge lawmakers to pass a long-awaited bill to protect domestic workers, and some chanted, "Long live Indonesian women." With the Taliban government's banning of women from universities in Afghanistan, Iran's repression of the Masa Amini protests, new U.S. restrictions on abortion rights, and the Ukraine's war impact on women, there are many reasons to protest. Global progress on women's rights is vanishing before our eyes, UN Chief Antonio Guterres warned on Monday, saying gender equality would take another 3 centuries to achieve. Afghan universities reopened on Monday after a winter break, but only men returned to classes, with the Taliban authorities' ban on women in higher education still in force some 18 months after they seized power. On the eve of the International Women's Day, the European Union imposed sanctions on Taliban individuals and entities deemed to be responsible for violence and rights abuses against women. The sanctions also targeted officials from 5 other countries, including Iran, Russia, South Sudan, Myanmar, and Syria. In Europe, marches will take place in many countries, including France, where demonstrators will demand equality both at work and in life in around 150 towns and cities, a far higher number than in previous years, organizers say. In London, the Madame Tussauds Museum will mark the day by unveiling a new waxwork of suffragette leader Emmeline Pankhurst, who began an intense struggle 120 years ago that won women's rights to vote. Elsewhere, demonstrations have been banned. In Pakistan, where marches are criticized for promoting liberal Western values and for not respecting religious and cultural sensitivities, organizers have had to fight multiple court challenges to press ahead with demonstrations. And in communist-run Cuba, activists seeking permission to demonstrate were arrested earlier this year, with feminist organizations instead urging people to join a virtual march on social media to raise awareness about gender violence and femicides.
And finally, from Greece, protesters gathered outside the Athens Academy ahead of a march to Syntagma Square after a train disaster that killed 57 people and sparked anger across the country. A police spokesperson in Athens said around 23,000 people are on the streets of central Athens as the dilapidated trail network and technical failures are blamed for the head-on collision between the two trains. The demonstrations came as Greek civil servants staged a 24-hour walkout with doctors, teachers and transport workers also going on strike. The train tragedy that unfolded in Greece this week, claiming dozens of lives in the country's worst rail disaster, has exposed chronic failures by successive administrations, insiders say. This was a crash that was waiting to happen, they argue. The passenger train with over 350 people on board ran for several kilometers on the same track as an incoming freight train, reportedly after the station master in the central city of Larissa failed to en route one of the trains. The 59-year-old, who has been charged with negligent homicide, has admitted partial responsibility for the accident. However, there were other factors in play, his lawyer said on Thursday. For decades, Greece's 2,552-kilometer rail network has been plagued by mismanagement, poor maintenance and obsolete equipment. The accident has also exposed a confusing mix of responsibilities between private rail operator Hellenic Train, the state company OSE that still owns the track network, and a state watchdog nominally tasked with oversight. Greece's transport minister, Kostas Karamanlis, who resigned within hours of the disaster, acknowledged that government efforts to improve conditions over the last 3.5 years were sadly not enough to prevent such an accident. And that's all the international news we had for you. Thank you for watching and do have yourself a fantastic evening.